Welcome back to another episode of NextGenDDS. This is your co-host, Wes Lyon. As always, with me in chair number 2, Dr. Scott Menaker. Scott, good to see you again.
Hey, great to be here again, Wes. It's always fun.
Absolutely. Well, today we got a super fun topic for everyone. One that the dental students aren't going to be as familiar with unless they've gone to the dentist with insurance. But we want to do a quick episode on understanding dental insurance and reimbursements and how they work. I don't think this is something people are going to attack on day one. However, I think it's good to have a really good overview of what goes on. That way, when they go into their first practice, they can be looking for the right things or understanding. Or is there negotiating associate contracts? They might, start to ask questions on maybe one's one level of collections and one's a different level or percentage of collections, but what collections are probably means something
That's
to your pay.
That's typically how you're getting paid.
So,
they're not paying you today's. They're not paying you on production, because that's just I used to call it your net production number. The production number was before any write-offs. And if you're in network with a lot of these PPOs, and we'll talk about all this stuff in a moment, but if you're taking a discount on that fee, that's not what you're getting paid on. You're never going to collect that number. And when I figured that out and kept track of that, and I did some consulting as I was working, that was the first number my wife and I would go look at. And doctors were just astounded by how much of a discount. They were just looking at, how much money's in the bank, and that's not it. So let me give you just a quick brief history of dental insurance.
And I think too, we have a prior episode, so we're going to give you a brief overview, but then we want to concentrate on what to look for from the patient side, you can actually make this work for you.
Yep. So, dental insurance, again, the quick history, we may have talked about it previously, is it came out in about 1972, and it was a real benefit where at the time, if a crown was costing $450 and the insurance was paying maybe $2,500 maximum, you could actually get some serious work if you had some serious needs. Today, insurance is basically, that maximum is anywhere from $750 to $1,000. Fees are, that crown is not $450. It's probably closer to $1,500. And so you don't get a whole lot for that anymore. It's just
it doesn't typically pay 100% anymore either.
Nope.
Even if you're a network, typically it's 70% on average.
It's kind of crazy. So what happened over time is there was no such thing as a PPO, or a preferred provider. It was, you had insurance, you go anywhere you wanted, and then the insurance companies figured out that there was a better way to offer and sell more insurance, which was, we'll require the dentist to be in network. And what that in-network says, you're going to take a discount. That could be anywhere from 20 to 40%, maybe even 50% on the fee, depending on the plan.
Sometimes 60, 70%.
Yeah.
I've seen $200 crowns. I'm not kidding. It gets bad.
And those kind of things become, so if a crown, let's say if crown was $1,500 as a fee for service practice, and you're taking, let's just take 50% of that, you're getting $750 for that crown. Did the fees go? Did your staff take a pay cut? Did the lab offer to go do it cheaper? Maybe, unless if they're sending it to China or sending it overseas somewhere, maybe, but then you really got to question the quality. Did your dental supplies go down? Did your rent go down? Nothing changed?
No, I'm pretty certain the supply companies give you a discount if you're in network, right?
Yeah, for sure. No,
definitely not.
So at the end of the day, what we're really trying to say is, when you go to a practice, especially for our young dentists that are working in a practice that is very heavily dependent on these PPOs, you have to understand that the production number that you think you're working towards, you're never going to collect that number.
Yeah,
it's a much different number.
Make it simple. You take the discount. Whether or not you're the owner or the associate doctor, the doctors are the ones who take the discount. Nobody else in the equation takes the discount. The insurance company makes more money. You make less money. That's as simple as it gets.
And unfortunately, the world's evolved around, and patients have kind of been trained as things have moved on to, I just need to go to somebody who's a network. Well, there are a lot of practices out there that don't accept that are not in network. My practice was one of those. We were in network for one. I probably rue the day that I decided to go do that. But fortunately, it was only one, and the reimbursement levels were pretty good with that.
Was it Delta?
Unfortunately, it was Delta. That I don't think really has raised our reimbursement.
We're gonna come back to Delta on the back end. Just for everyone listening, Delta's a little bit different animal on how this whole thing works. We want to walk you through how it works from the patient side so you can understand how to communicate, deal with it from your end of the table. But you have to understand what the patient goes through, and Delta does something different than the rest of them. And that's why you're going to find if a practice is in network, it's highly unlikely that they're not in network with Delta. A lot of them are just in network with Delta. Some have 2 or 3. But if there's one in the practice, and this is just a number based off my experience, if there is at least one insurance in the practice, there's a 95% chance that one is Delta. If there's multiple, there's a 95% chance Delta is one of them.
Absolutely.
Actually, if there's multiple, it's probably a 99% chance that Delta is one of them.
I've not seen, and I deal with a lot of doctors that are looking to purchase practices, and that's one of the questions that I ask is, what kind of practice is it, and are they in network, and who is it for? And probably the only one that most doctors can say is, I'm pretty sure they're in network for Delta.
Yes. But they want to concentrate what goes on from the patient side so you can understand how to handle this. So we're going to push Delta to the side for a second because they're a little bit of a different animal on how they handle it. Now, if a patient does have a dental insurance, that dental insurance typically pays benefits to the practice, and that is whether or not you are in or out of network. So for all those other insurances you were out of network, did you still accept benefits from the insurance company?
Yeah. And you're taking assignment of benefits. And basically it says the patient doesn't necessarily, whatever they get for that is going to come directly to the practice. It's not going to have to go to the patient first.
So let's start with hygiene, and then we'll move into actual restorative work or any work that needs to get done. But generally speaking, if you're in network with an insurance and somebody comes in for, cleaning, exam, x-rays, all of that, if you're in network, generally it's usually 100% covered. Is that fair?
Typically, it's going to be, right.
So the patient's going to pay 0 out of pocket. Now, if you move out of network, generally speaking, you're not going to be fully covered. So that patient is going to have essentially a copay is probably the easiest way, or what a patient thinks of it as, is I go in and they don't even probably look too much that was $300. They probably look at what did I have to pay, and that varies by insurance company. Some, for example, I have Delta still. I will not. Hopefully, nobody at my wife's job listens to us. But once her maternity leave ends, I will no longer have Delta for some odd reason. But mine actually pays 100% out of the network on the way
and some
mine's
of them,
set up.
that's really surprising. Is some of them actually do.
So
and insurance companies don't want to tell you that either.
Well, I know the inner workings on this. So behind the scenes, there's really 2 types of dental insurances. One is going to be self-funded administrative services. So my wife's company is a self-funded dental plan, but Delta administers the plan. So it's my wife's company that actually says, hey, they can go anywhere they want and we're going to pay 100% of it. This is it. This is just a benefit for our employees. And then all Delta does is, they get paid. I'm sure her company charges or pays something to Delta. But all Delta is doing is they're just administering this benefit on behalf of the company. Now, it's important to know that based off of where you are. Like, for example, I was in a town in South Carolina that has a factory in town, and almost everybody is connected to the dental insurance with the factory, very small town. I'm in there, and they're all having this freak out moment over Delta and the reimbursement rate. And it's at a study club, and apparently no one knew why I was there and who I was. So I wasn't real certain what I was doing, but eventually I kind of raised my hand and said, hey, I think y'all hired me to come in and talk about this. So let's talk about it. I'm like, y'all do realize that you're 100% out of network benefits here. And I got lit up. You have no idea what you're talking about. Like, okay, so I just sit there and take it. And eventually this one doctor raises his hand and goes, actually, he's 100% correct. And I've known this for years. I just didn't really want to tell my competition. And one guy out of the 30 in this town had been taken out of the network and knew it was 100%. So that can happen. However, I think it's going to be more common, especially in urban areas. You're going to have true dental insurance. It's not going to be self-administered.
That's right.
So, Scott, you practiced for a long time. Out of network hygiene, or they come in for regular hygiene. What's the range of what they're having to pay?
I mean, typically, we would kind of look at that and say, for the most part, it was probably maybe 30 to 40%. Now, going back to your comment, it was interesting. We found for a while, even being out of network and just taking assignment of benefits, there were many plans that would pay almost the full fee. So let's call it, and we like round numbers. Let's say it's $200 for a cleaning and exam. We might have, there were some insurance companies that would just, basically that patient was going to have to come up with an extra 30% of it. They were going to have to come out of pocket for 60%. If you had x-rays on, it was probably going to be a little bit more. Those are the ones where we did get some phone calls.
So they're probably, just put numbers, they're probably paying somewhere between $30 and $100, depending on if they're getting x-rays that day, if they're out of the network.
Potentially, right.
Yeah, potentially. And then the insurance company is probably paying somewhere between, depending on if it's $200 or $300 that day, they're probably paying somewhere between $120 and $250 on the high end.
It could be reasonable. Yeah, it could certainly be in that range. That's right.
So yeah, but that's what the patient's going to concentrate on, is their portion, right? So depending on the insurance company or the benefits, it kind of depends on how easy it is, right? If somebody leaves you over a $20 copay, they didn't value you in the first place.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Now, $100 every time I come in versus free, not everybody makes tons of money.
That's right.
Right? You don't necessarily blame them for that.
And I think the biggest thing that you'll realize, and we'll spend a little bit of time here, is if you're providing value and you're conveying that value. And this is the same for any business. It's whether you go to an Outback Steakhouse or you go to in Charlotte Steak 48, one of the top steakhouses, you're going to pay an exorbitantly different number. Yet you probably still have people who are willing to pay that difference if they're getting the value. So you've got to create that value for what you're doing. And we had many patients who just said, "I'll pay whatever the difference is. I don't care."
Yes,
but they don't do that just because they picked you off a list that you're on.
Right.
They're doing that because they made a conscious decision based on a referral. They met you. They've been in your office. They understand the care and the quality and the fact that it's different. You're not in a factory in a way. You're just you're in a place that's going to take great care of you, and they're willing to pay the difference.
Yeah. So for everyone out there, though, if you're going out of network and you're trying to create this value, though, remember, you're not necessarily needing to create the entire $300 of value if the appointment was $300. Most of the time, the patient's going to have, let's say, a $300, they're going to x-rays that day. They're probably having to come out of pocket $50 to $100. Seem fair?
That's reasonable.
Yeah, so they're coming out $50 to $100. You've got to create $50 to $100 worth of value there. It's not an mountain to climb over.
It's pretty simple.
Yes, it's a lot of people get more scared about this than they have to be. It's not this humongous mountain to climb. You can do it. You really have to create value. You have to create a good patient experience. I mean, everybody hates going into the hospital, right? I mean, I pay Mayo $1,300 just to go down there and be treated like a human.
Right.
And it's the best $1,300 I spend every year because I go in for 2 days. I take care of everything at once. I get walked room to room. I have a lounge to go into. Instead, if I went to the Charlotte system, okay, you need to get referred here. It's going to be 4 weeks. It's going to take 6 months for me to even see the right doctor, and $1,300 down there, I'll be in the surgeon's office the next day. I don't even need to see the surgeon, but they'll say, hey, so that's the type of experience that you need to create. But it can be done. But you need to pay attention to that, in your first job, or as you're buying a practice, right? Because you might have this skill set. Some people are much more natural about it, very caring, know how to communicate. And it's not to say not everyone's caring, but not everybody wears that on their sleeve, right? Some people just, their personality type is, even though they care, they don't run in there and show their full heart, right? So as you're looking at practices and where to land, you need to make sure you kind of land somewhere you're going to succeed.
Yeah, and it's when I'm looking at helping docs buy practices, looking at that list, if they're in network for, let's call it 10 different insurance plans, we'll talk about red flags. It doesn't mean it can't work. It just means you're going to end up having to work a whole lot harder to make the financials work in that practice. Can it be done, and can it be rewarding? Sure, but it just creates a whole set of different challenges. But I'll go back to, you're from the patient's perspective. Today, insurance companies are kind of leading people to believe you have to go in network. If you don't go in network, you almost to the extent that you can't do that. And so a lot of times you'll have patients that will call. They were calling our practice and saying, "Hey, listen, I want to become a new patient. Are you in network?" And we would typically, we were honest. We would say no. The only one we're in network with was Delta Dental. But we really want you to come in and see the difference, because you're not going to get the kind of level in care in each practice. It's not going to be the same. It just can't be. And if we could get him in the office one time, we could make up that difference. And then whatever it was, I had, to your point earlier, I had patients who had a ton of money. I had patients with very little money, but I always treatment planned them the same way. And we always did the right thing for them. And if they wanted the best care at the way we provided it, they were going to pay for it. And I had very few people look at me and go, "I don't want the best care. I'm going to go down the street and get the cheap care over here."
No, definitely.
So there is that patient perspective of, what am I getting? And sometimes you're going to have to get through that first push.
You brought up something great there, though, that I forgot to go back to, which is your real hiccup most of the time is the hygiene, right? By the time they're in the practice and we're going to restorative or we're going to work, that's not usually the in-network usually isn't your barrier, right? They might not have the money for the treatment, but how many times did somebody take your treatment plan to an in-network doctor? I mean, I'm sure it happened once or twice, but anything noticeable?
No.
So your real barrier when you're looking at the whole thing is their experience with the regular hygiene appointments, right? If you can get them in there, you can treatment plan. The I'm out of network versus in network on restorative, it isn't going to be your huge issue. I always laugh. I always poll the room when I'm speaking to doctors to say, well, whose crown is under $1,500, whose crown is under $1,200, whose crown is over $1,800, and you get these wildly different responses, and I go, and whose patients think their crown is anything other than expensive? And they're like, look, it doesn't matter if it's $700, $1,200, $1,800. At the point they need the care, it's expensive to them. You have to understand that. But if they truly need the care and you can demonstrate that, they're going to understand it's expensive.
So, we've spent a little bit of time really talking through kind of that patient perspective, your perspective, and you've got to figure out how to make those jive together. We'll probably spend another episode or two really talking about building your brand and how you create that value. But understand that the patient is there for initially maybe just the money, but once you get beyond that, then the rest of it almost, you can really kind of end up taking care of yourself. And you got to really look at, where do you want to be? Do you want to be working, do you want to be getting $1,500 for a crown, which is a reasonable fee? It's not crazy expensive. It's not, we've seen them up there for $3,000, $4,000 a crown. Not that much different than the crown I was doing for $1,500. But you don't want to also be doing it for $700 because that's all, as we said, where is that coming out of? That's coming straight out of your pocket.
No, and if this is becoming a big issue, in all likelihood, it's you haven't created the value. This is true in any business, right? If the patients are complaining about the money, you didn't create the value. The money is the excuse out of it. It's much easier to tell somebody to their face, I can't afford this, than it is to tell them, why do I need this? Right? It's I always tell this because I used to consult for financial consulting and advisory firms before eventually I got sick of it. So now I run my own.
It's always a good thing to run your own business.
Yeah, you get sick of telling everyone else what to do and they don't listen, so you go run your own. But it's like, hey, if they're telling you it's not the money or it's the money, it was you. They went and did it somewhere else with somebody that they felt more comfortable with. So it kind of gets into your brand, your marketing, how you're going to treat that, and that's going to be next episode. But it's something that you can overcome. And one last kind of point I want to make in here is, I think if we go through the history of this, Scott, it was, it started and everybody got a big benefit. It was great. Then they started cutting, and we started with this in-network status, and it became something kind of terrifying from the dentist perspective. That value was harder and harder to create, largely because of a lack of patient education. For better or worse, there's been a lot of changes in the dental industry, and there are some dental factories out there. And most people know somebody or have experienced themselves that they've been into a factory. I mean, I've done it. I've got dental work I shouldn't have gotten done. I'm not proud of it, and I'm actually pretty angry. They're currently trying to collect $100 from 10 years ago. Not kidding. This happened 2 weeks ago. I started getting messages from them, and I asked them to send me all my records. I need to have a conversation with the board. Right. They're still hounding me, though, and it's changed ownership. And I'm sitting there like, you guys are, y'all are out of your minds thinking you're getting this money. But once that happens once, or they hear a story, now all of a sudden I've noticed, even within my own friends outside of here, that people are seeking out the value more than they were. Now, you're not going to convert everybody.
That's right. And you don't want to. That's right. If you want the people who are, that are shopping for the cheapest fee, please, I would almost look at people sometimes, honestly, and look at them and go, if it's all about the price, I said, you're in the wrong place. Yeah. And I would much rather them go out the door, because those are going to be the people who are going to just hound you over the good care you've provided. They're just going to be mad about something. We used to always talk about, if you do something really well, that person's going to probably tell one or two people. If you do something wrong to somebody, they're going to probably tell about 20 people. Or in today's world, they're going to be all over social media. They're going to be on whatever account they can, because it's just too easy to just say something bad than it is say something really nice about somebody.
Yeah, I'll give you a real life example. My wife is in this book club in the neighborhood. So there's 10 or 15 women in the book club. And every now and then we all get together. So hang out with the husbands. And through this book club, there's a lot of people. They either end up with my phone number, or Patterson is actually right outside the store. The Patterson manager is also, his wife is in the book club too. So we get all these phone calls and, hey, this happened. Who do I need to see? And they've usually gone to the same chop shop and they've been recommended something absurd. And we tell them, hey, here's the doctors you need to go see. And we explain the whole in-network, out-of-network. And 90% of them, oh my gosh, thank you so much. And they run off to the fee-for-service doctor we recommend they see. However, I've got 2 examples out of the 25 where there's just no saving them. One of them, this girl, she got recommended 15 fillings. She didn't need anything 6 months before at the last dentist. And I'm like, so we give her the doctor. She calls back. They're not in network. I'm like, well, no.
There's a reason.
There's a reason they're not in network. She wouldn't go. But then the funniest one was this guy finds out. I have no idea who he is, but he's at this barbecue, and he finds out that we work in dentistry. Tyler lives in my neighborhood too. So there's 3 of us. He finds out the 3 of us work in dental world, and he just starts going off on this pediatric dentist. It's over $20. And they let him off the hook with the $20. He called, yelled, and they just, I don't know who it was, but they were just like, yeah, just, you're no longer a patient here. You don't owe us the $20. But we tried to explain this to him, and, halfway through, he cuts us off and he starts bad-mouthing his pediatrician too. And we're just sitting there, and we just, me and the Patterson rep, we just shut our mouths.
Yeah,
there's no
help.
saving
There's
this
no help.
guy.
Yeah, that's right.
He's never going to go anywhere that makes him pay $1 out of network, and you don't want that patient in your practice. So if you are having this, there's one of two issues. Either one, you're not creating the value, or two, your marketing is messed up. So I'm excited for next episode. We're talking about personal branding and marketing. But if you're running Google ads and people are signing up for appointments at 3 a.m, and that's how you get all your new patients,
Be
you
very
have
careful.
the wrong crowd.
Yeah. You might get a few out of those, but I remember many years ago there was the whole thing with the Groupon. I'm not even sure if Groupon still even exists today, but it was like everybody was looking to do some initial marketing, and so dentists were kind of flying into this thing. We did it one time, but we had a real plan. We didn't do the bottom of the barrel number, but doctors were doing, $39. Well, your hygienist was not taking a cut. You had to be upselling treatment in order for that to work. We had a real plan. We didn't take the $39. It was closer to our fee, but we had a real plan to convert them in a marketing plan, and we followed up, and it worked okay. We did it once. We decided it was just not worth. It was not worth our efforts. But you're trying to if you're trying to just beat people on price, then all you're doing is providing a commodity. If you're trying to beat people on service and value, that's a whole different game. And so we're just trying to, I guess today we're really trying to explain the PPO world is you're not going to beat people on value. You're really just trying to beat them on price. And that's a tough place to be, because you're going to take a discount in your reimbursement.
And we've seen people also who compete on value, but they are in network and they are broke. You can't.
You can do it. You're just not. You're just not going to be in a position that you should be in. We think you should be reimbursed for the care and the level of care and the service that you provide.
Now, this one, I wouldn't actually say this to a patient, but I say this to people when they bring this up and they're looking for a new dentist. I'm like, well, if they take every insurance under the sun, that dentist is working, maybe owning a practice, making $200,000 a year. That's not a ton of money in today's world. Coming out of dental school, that's probably a ton of money. However, mid-30s living in the suburbs, like, that's kind of enough money to get by. So, I mean, I always look at them like, well, do you feel comfortable going to a dentist that's only making $150,000, $200,000 a year? I'm like, honestly, I want my dentist, just like my doctor, I want them to make a lot of money. I want them to be really good at what they do. Like, there's
an old story that I heard in some of the CEs, and they were talking about, it's like you're getting ready to go have open heart surgery. Do you want a guy driving a Prius, or you want a guy driving a Maserati? He goes, I'm voting for the guy driving the Maserati, because he's got to be good at that. And it's not just you're not good because you're doing a lot of them. You've got to be providing that. So we're really trying to spend some time talking through providing value. What are you taking a discount on your service and fee for that's coming out of your pocket? And just understand, when you start to go work for a job or you're going to go buy a practice, look at, what kind of patient base are you in network? Those are just some simple questions that you want to understand, because it'll really start to explain what you're kind of getting into.
Yeah. And, ask the front desk, spend some time, especially if you're an associate somewhere and you've got some free time. Spend some time and poke around at the front desk and just, not trying to manage them, but just how things get handled. Figure out, hey, when the phone rings, somebody's out of network, how do we handle this? Right. And figure out how that patient experience works. And that's what we want you to take away, is that whole interaction at the front desk can be a killer. It also can be something that's easily overcome being in network versus out of network. Now, last one, and we'll probably just dedicate a whole podcast on how to deal with Delta at some point. But Delta in a lot of states does not allow you to accept the assignment of benefits, which means the patient pays the $300. And this is actually what I do. I get reimbursed 100%, but if I have x-rays, it's about $300 that day. I swipe my card for $300. Delta sends me a check 3 weeks later. Now, because there's no assignment of benefits accepted, Patient experience is wildly different. Asking somebody for $40, $50, if they don't value you for $40, $50, look in the mirror, did I create it? Or is this a bad patient? Okay. Their experience, their perception, even though it's not reality, is I went here and it's free, and I went here and it's $300. You got a mountain to climb on Delta.
Right.
It's not as
Right.
easy.
And we that was a very, very big battle, because originally they did, and then they stopped doing that. And in midstream, we had to take our whole patient base that was, in the Delta network. We had to really re-educate them and said, and we probably we lost some patients, but that was again over price. And again, I was never one that worried if it was over $300. I was not. That wasn't as an important a patient as I thought it was.
But yeah, that assignment of benefits is why you're going to see a lot more practices in network with Delta than you're going to see out of network. The others are going to be much more common to be out of network, especially depending on the area. Sometimes the copay is as little as $20, and if somebody's leaving you over $20, you've got to just let them go.
Yep, that's right.
It's not
because you're gonna eventually you're trying to get them for, hey, listen, you want to get your teeth white, or you want to go get orthodontics, or you need to replace some teeth, or you want some, cause there's just different things. Insurance is never going to pay for that stuff, but you just want to you're by creating value, people will pay you what you're worth.
Yeah, if they're not going to pay you the 20, they're not going to pay you 50 for a crown.
No.
Right. It doesn't matter.
So I think, at the end of the day, we tried to give you just a little bit of a perspective of the Delta, not the Delta, but the PPO world. It's your perspective, but you also need to be sure you're understanding the patient's perspective too, and how they deal with that and the way that you overcome that.
Yeah. So real quick, final thing to wrap up is, how do you deal with this? And basically make sure never put dental insurance in a negative light to the patients. That's a huge no. It's you're so lucky to have that benefit. No dental insurance pays 100%, but we're going to make sure it pays every dollar it can on your behalf here. And that's how it needs to be handled. It needs to be a positive. If, somebody's got this benefit and it's going to pay them $1,000 a year, even if it's only 50% of whatever dental work, it's still $1,000 a year it's going to pay them. Don't bash it for what it is. We'll bash it to ourselves, but we're not going to bash it to the patient. We want to treat it as a positive and just learn how to educate them on what it covers, doesn't cover, and overall that a copay isn't a huge deal.
Right. Well, great. This has been fun again, and stay tuned for the next
episode, how to build your personal brand to be out of network. So
sounds great.
I'm looking forward to it, Scott. See you next episode.
Absolutely.